Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Big shout out to Teacher Ricky for letting us kind of take over his awesome YouTube channel for this deep dive.
Yeah, big thanks to teacher Ricky.
Uh, we're tackling Nir Eyal's book, Indistractable, today.
Yes, we are.
A lot of you have been asking about this, and it's something that I think we all struggle with in our lives.
It's a popular one, for sure.
Yeah, and, especially if you're somebody who is feeling stuck in a rut
Mm.
or like you're just constantly running into problems and roadblocks in your life.
Right, like you can't catch a break.
Yeah, you can't catch a break, exactly. This book really kind of offers some really interesting solutions for that.
It does. It kind of goes deeper than you think.
It does, goes way deeper.
When you first hear the title Indistractable, you think, oh, this is just another, put down your phone kind of book. But
Right.
but it's not. And Nir Eyal, in the book, he starts out with this pretty heart-wrenching story about a time when he missed a really special moment with his daughter because he was too absorbed in his phone.
Yeah, that anecdote really gets to you.
Yeah.
And I think it really makes you question, like, what are we sacrificing when we're constantly giving in to distractions?
All right. What are we missing out on?
Exactly. And especially when those distractions are keeping us from dealing with the real issues in our life
Yeah.
that are causing us to feel stuck.
Absolutely. And that's where Ayul's concept of traction comes in. You're listening to this deep dive right now. That's traction.
Yes.
You are actively seeking knowledge, maybe even looking for ways to improve your life. Distraction is anything that pulls you away from those goals.
Right, like that nagging feeling of anxiety that sends you down a social media rabbit hole.
Exactly. Or that pile of laundry you're avoiding because it's just too overwhelming to even think about.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Ale argues that most distraction actually isn't caused by those external things. It's actually driven by internal triggers.
Right. So it's not necessarily like the phone itself.
It's not the phone, it's you.
It's you. Yeah.
And this is where it gets a little unsettling.
Yeah, it can be a little uncomfortable to think about this.
It can.
But think about that study where people chose to shock themselves
Why?
rather than just sit alone with their thoughts.
Oh my gosh.
That's how desperate we are sometimes to avoid discomfort, even if it means literally shocking ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, maybe most of us wouldn't go that far, but I think we can all relate to that feeling of
We've all been there.
reaching for our phones, just endlessly scrolling, doing anything to escape that feeling of boredom or anxiety or even just like plain restlessness.
Absolutely. And the more we try to fight those urges to distract ourselves, the stronger they become.
Oh gosh, so we're fighting a losing battle.
Kind of, it's like that white bear problem.
Oh yeah,
If I tell you don't think about a white bear, what's the first thing that talks into your head?
white bear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So trying not to think about something actually makes you think about it even more.
Ugh. It's like when you're on a diet and all you can think about is pizza.
Exactly. And that's what's happening with distraction. The more we try to resist those urges, the more power we give them.
So what's the solution then if we can't just like white knuckle our way through this?
Well, instead of trying to fight those internal triggers, I'll suggest we learn to manage them. He uses this fascinating study about flight attendants
Okay.
and their nicotine cravings.
Interesting.
It turns out that the cravings were strongest not based on how long it had been since their last cigarette, but on how long they had to wait until they could smoke again.
So it was like the anticipation.
Exactly. It's like our brains are wired to anticipate rewards, even if those rewards are negative.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So the closer we feel to a potential reward, even if it's something we know is bad for us, the stronger that desire becomes.
So like how do we kind of rewire our brains to make those positive things feel closer?
Right. So that's the key. If we want to break free from distraction, we need to find ways to make the time until we engage in positive actions feel shorter, more immediately rewarding, almost like tricking our brains into choosing those better options.
Okay, I like that. So how do we actually do that?
Well, IL outlines a 4-step process for managing those internal triggers.
All right, hit me with it.
Step 1 is awareness. You have to become aware of the discomfort that precedes the distraction.
Boy.
So what are you feeling before you reach for your phone or, procrastinate on that important task or whatever your distraction is?
Got it. So step one is all about noticing those feelings before they lead us down the rabbit hole.
Exactly. That's step 1.
What's next?
Step 2, write it down.
Or
Actually, take a moment to jot down what you were feeling and what specifically triggered the urge to get distracted.
okay.
This helps you become more aware of your patterns.
So we're like detectives of our own minds.
Exactly. You're gathering evidence.
Okay, I like it. What's step 3?
Step 3, this one's crucial. Explore the sensation with curiosity, not judgment. So instead of getting angry at yourself for feeling bored or stressed, try to observe those feelings as an outsider. What are the physical sensations? Where do you feel them in your body?
Oh, so we're not trying to like push those feelings away.
hmm
We're actually leaning into them.
You're getting to know them.
Interesting. Okay, and finally, step 4.
Be extra cautious during those in-between moments, those transitions in your day,
Like what?
like waiting in line, commuting, or even just finishing one task and starting another.
Okay.
These are prime times for those internal triggers to strike.
So we have to be extra vigilant during those weeks.
Exactly. You've got to be ready because that's when those distractions are going to try to sneak in.
Got it. Okay. So by becoming more mindful of our internal triggers and learning to work with them, we can start to break free from those patterns that keep us stuck.
That's the goal.
But let's be real, sometimes, even when we're motivated,
Yeah,
the things we need to do to overcome our problems, they're not exactly thrilling.
true.
So how do we stay motivated when faced with those less than exciting tasks?
Well, Eyal suggests a surprising approach. Reimagine those tasks to make them more fun. He even uses the example of mowing the lawn.
Mowing the lawn.
Mowing the lawn.
How do you make that fun?
Well, it's about finding ways to add elements of playfulness and challenge. Maybe you set a time goal, you try a new mowing pattern, or even listen to an interesting podcast while you work.
So we're finding ways to make the mundane more engaging.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. But that kind of takes willpower, doesn't it?
Well, actually, Eyal argues that the whole concept of willpower is misleading.
Really?
It's not a finite resource that we run out of.
Okay.
It's more about our mindset and how we view those challenges.
So if you think you have weak willpower, you're more likely to give in, even if you could actually resist the temptation.
There's research that suggests just that labeling yourself as someone who lacks self-control becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, wow.
So instead of focusing on willpower, Eyal suggests cultivating self-compassion.
So instead of beating ourselves up for giving in to distraction.
We need to be more understanding and supportive of ourselves, especially when we're struggling.
Okay, so self-compassion is key.
It's essential. Research shows that self-compassion actually makes us more resilient, better able to bounce back from setbacks.
So it's like offering yourself the same kindness and encouragement you'd give a friend who's having a hard time.
Exactly. It's about being your own best friend.
This is starting to feel less like a battle against distraction and more like a journey of self-discovery.
I like that.
We're learning to understand ourselves, our triggers, our patterns.
And that self-awareness is key to creating a life that's more aligned with what truly matters to us, our values, our
Yeah.
goals, our aspirations.
Okay, so speaking of creating a life that's more aligned with what matters to us, let's talk about Eyal's concept of time boxing.
Okay, let's do it.
Now, I've heard of this, but I always imagined it as something super rigid, like scheduling every minute of my day.
It doesn't have to be that strict.
Okay, good, because I'm not sure I could handle that.
Yeah. It's more about being intentional with your time. It's like creating a roadmap for your day, ensuring you're dedicating time to the things that truly matter. Those traction activities we talked about earlier.
So it's less about controlling every minute and more about making sure those important things don't get lost in the shuffle.
Exactly. And you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it's distracting you from.
Right.
Time boxing helps clarify your goals and values so you can make conscious choices about how you spend your time and energy.
I'm starting to see how this could be really helpful, especially for people who are feeling lost or struggling to prioritize. It's like creating a structure for success.
It can be a really powerful tool for that.
Even amidst the chaos of life, does Eyal give any specific examples of how to actually apply time boxing?
He does. He suggests using time boxing to boost work productivity by scheduling focused work sessions and minimizing those tempting distractions. He also talks about applying it to relationships.
Okay.
By scheduling quality time with loved ones, it's really about being intentional across all aspects of your life.
So we're not just talking about work here. We're talking about taking control of our lives as a whole.
Exactly. And what's great about time boxing is that it's adaptable.
Okay.
You can tailor it to your own specific needs and goals, your energy levels, even your emotional state. There's no one-size-fits-all approach, which I think is really empowering.
Yeah, that is empowering because it means that it can actually work for anybody.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
just like this rigid system that you have to force yourself into.
Exactly.
This is all starting to feel a lot more manageable. We're not just fighting against distractions. We're proactively designing a life that's less susceptible to them.
That's the idea. You're building a fortress of focus.
Okay, I like that.
Brick by brick, using strategies like time boxing, managing those internal triggers, and even finding fun in the mundane.
Yeah, it's all starting to come together. But, we don't live in a vacuum.
Right.
we're constantly bombarded by those external triggers in our environment.
Like those pings and dings,
Yeah.
notifications, all those things that are designed to hijack our attention.
And pull us away from what we're trying to focus on.
Exactly. And to understand how these external triggers work, Eyal introduces the fog behavior model.
Okay, tell me more about that.
This model basically states that for any behavior to occur, three elements need to align:
Okay.
motivation, ability, and a trigger.
So, like, we might be motivated to work on a project,
Right.
but then a notification pops up, and suddenly we're checking our phones.
And there goes your ability to resist.
Right.
That notification becomes the trigger that derails your good intentions.
Oof, it's so frustrating.
It can be, and while we can't always control those external triggers,
Right.
we can learn to manage them, and Eyal offers some really practical tips for hacking back those triggers and reclaiming our attention.
Okay, let's dive into those, because I think we could all use a little less distraction and a lot more focus in our lives. What's the first suggestion?
One of the most effective strategies is something we touched on earlier, using visual signals to let others know you're not to be interrupted.
Right.
Think do not disturb signs, headphones, even a closed door.
It seems so simple, but sometimes those clear boundaries are all we need.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, okay. What other tactics does he recommend?
He's a big proponent of batch processing tasks like email and social media.
Okay.
Instead of constantly checking messages throughout the day, set aside specific times to deal with them all at once.
So you're basically creating, like, designated time for distraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of letting it bleed into every moment of your day.
Makes sense.
And it minimizes the number of times you're exposed to those tempting external triggers. You're not constantly getting sucked into that vortex of notifications and messages.
So we're building boundaries. We're batch processing. What else can we do to fight back against those external triggers?
Well, sometimes the best solution is the simplest. Remove those tempting distractions from your environment altogether.
Okay, you mean like actually putting my phone in a drawer,
Exactly.
out of sight, out of mind.
It can be surprisingly effective, and it's not just about physical distractions. Eyal also talks about curating your digital environment.
So being mindful of, like, the apps and websites that we allow into our digital lives.
Exactly. It's about taking a critical look at your digital habits and asking yourself, are these apps and websites truly serving me, or are they just sucking up my time and attention?
Right, because they can be really sneaky,
They can.
those apps.
And it's about being proactive in shaping your digital environment to support your goals and values rather than letting it control you.
We are taking back control,
Mm.
becoming more discerning about how we spend our time and energy, both online and offline.
That's the goal.
It's like we're building a digital detox into our daily lives,
Sure.
but in a way that feels empowering, not restrictive.
Exactly. And remember, it's a process.
Okay.
It takes time and experimentation to find the balance that works for you.
This is making me think about how much control we actually have over our lives, even when it feels like everything is spiraling out of control.
I think that's a really important point to remember. That's the beauty of Eyal's approach. He's not just offering quick fixes. He's providing tools for understanding ourselves and creating lasting change.
So it's not about becoming a robot who never gets distracted.
Right.
It's about understanding our own vulnerabilities, building strategies to manage those distractions, and ultimately using our time and energy in ways that align with our values and goals.
Exactly.
I love it.
It's about taking ownership of your attention and your life.
Yes. And that is a really powerful message,
It is.
especially for those who are feeling lost or discouraged. It's a reminder that even when faced with challenges, we have the ability to choose our focus, to shape our environment, and to create a life that feels more fulfilling and meaningful.
That's the ultimate goal.
It's like we're taking back the reins, becoming the authors of our own stories,
I love that analogy.
instead of letting distractions write the narrative.
Beautifully said.
And while we've focused a lot on practical strategies in this deep dive,
Yeah.
Eyal also emphasizes the importance of understanding those deeper reasons why we get distracted in the first place.
It's not just about the surface level distraction.
Right, it's about addressing the underlying needs and desires that drive us to seek those distractions.
Exactly. We need to understand the root cause of our distraction if we want to truly overcome it.
And that's where self-awareness and self-compassion become even more crucial.
Absolutely.
It's about understanding our triggers, our patterns, our vulnerabilities,
Yeah.
and being kind to ourselves when we falter.
That's so important.
This is resonating deeply with me, and I'm sure it is with our listeners as well.
I hope so.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being human,
Right.
about recognizing that we're all going to struggle at times.
We all have those moments.
And that's what makes Indistractable such a powerful and insightful book.
It really
It's
is.
not about offering a magic solution. It's about fostering a deeper understanding of ourselves and our relationship with distraction.
And that's a journey worth taking.
It is. It's like we're embarking on a journey of self-discovery, a journey towards creating a life that's more focused, intentional, and ultimately more fulfilling.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And that is a great place to wrap up part one of our deep dives into Nir Eyal's Indistractable. Stay tuned for part two, where we'll be exploring even more insights and strategies from this incredible book.
I can't wait. So welcome back to the deep dive into Indistractable.
We left off talking about, really like this idea of rewiring our brains,
Yeah, kind of like hacking our habits.
hacking our habits, becoming more intentional about how we spend our time and energy.
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful tools for that is Eyal's concept of time boxing.
Yeah, no, I've heard this term before, but I always imagined it as something super rigid, like scheduling every minute of my day.
Right. It gets a bad rap for being too structured, but it doesn't have to be that way at all.
Okay.
It's more about being intentional with your time, like creating a roadmap for your day, ensuring that you're making time for those things that really matter, those traction activities.
So it's less about like controlling every minute and more about just making sure that those important things, those things that are going to move us forward in life, that they don't get lost in the shuffle of everything else that's going on.
Exactly. And like we talked about earlier, you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it's distracting you from.
Right.
So time boxing helps you clarify your goals and values so you can make conscious choices about how you're spending your time and energy.
So it's like giving ourselves permission to say no to those things that aren't really serving us.
Yes, and yes to the things that are.
I'm starting to see how this could be really helpful, especially for people who are feeling lost or overwhelmed or just struggling to prioritize. It's like creating structure. And I think when you're feeling really down and out, structure can be really comforting.
Absolutely. It can be a really grounding force in your life.
Yeah. And so does IL give any specific examples in the book of how we can actually like apply time boxing to different areas of our lives?
He does. He talks about using time boxing to boost productivity at work, for example, by scheduling focused work sessions and minimizing distractions. He also talks about applying it to relationships,
Okay.
scheduling quality time with loved ones so you're not just letting those relationships kind of fall by the wayside.
Because that can happen really easily when you're feeling down.
Yeah.
It's like you just don't even have the energy to connect with people.
It's so easy to isolate yourself
Yeah.
when you're struggling. But time boxing can help you prioritize those connections even when it feels hard.
So it's like we're not just talking about work here. We're talking about taking control of all aspects of our lives.
Exactly.
And I love that because it feels really holistic.
Right. It's about creating a life that feels balanced and fulfilling.
Does Eyal talk at all about like how to actually make a time box schedule? I mean, does he have like a specific method that he recommends?
There are tons of different ways to approach time boxing, and
Okay.
what works for one person might not work for another. So AL really encourages experimentation, finding what feels right for you. There are apps you can use, planners, bullet journals, even just a simple piece of paper will do the trick.
So it's really about finding what works for you,
Exactly.
not about following someone else's rigid system.
Right. It's about taking the principles of time boxing and adapting them to your own unique needs and preferences.
This is making me think about, we talked about internal triggers earlier, but we don't live in a vacuum.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded by those external triggers as well.
Those pings, dings, and
Yeah.
notifications.
Like the world is designed to distract us.
It can feel that way sometimes, right?
It really can.
Like those things are specifically engineered to hijack our attention.
Yeah, and pull us away from whatever it is that we're trying to focus on.
Absolutely. And to understand how these external triggers work, Eyal introduces the fog behavior model.
Okay, break that down for me.
So this model basically states that for any behavior to occur, 3 elements need to be present at the same time.
Okay,
You have to have motivation. You have to have the ability to do the behavior.
got it.
And there has to be a trigger.
A trigger? Okay. So it's like you might be super motivated to go to the gym,
Right.
but then it's raining outside and suddenly you don't have the ability to actually get there.
Exactly. Or you're motivated to work on that big project, but then your phone buzzes with a notification.
Oh, yeah.
And that becomes the trigger that sends you down a social media rabbit hole.
Ugh, those notifications, they get me every time.
They're so sneaky.
So if
Right.
those three elements aren't all present at the same time, then the behavior won't happen.
Right. So if you're not motivated or you don't have the ability or there's no trigger, then you're not going to do the thing.
That's so interesting.
It's a simple model, but it's really powerful for understanding how our behavior works.
Okay, so when it comes to those external triggers, are we just like at the mercy of, all the dings and pings and notifications? Are we powerless to resist them?
Not at all.
Okay, good.
While we can't always control those external triggers, we can absolutely manage them.
Okay, I like that.
An Owl offers a ton of practical tips for hacking back those triggers and reclaiming our attention.
Okay, let's hear it, because I think we could all use a little bit more of that in our lives.
Yeah.
What are some of those tips?
Well, one of the simplest and most effective strategies is using visual signals to let others know that you're not to be interrupted.
Okay,
Think do not disturb signs, headphones, a closed door, those kinds of things.
right. So setting boundaries?
Exactly. Those visual cues can signal to others that you're trying to focus and that they should respect your time.
Yeah, and it's funny how just like a simple visual cue can sometimes be enough to kind of like snap you out of that distracted state.
It's like a reminder to yourself as much as it is to others.
Yeah, it's like, oh, right. I'm supposed to be focusing on this right now.
Exactly. It helps you get back on track.
What else does Al recommend?
Well, he's also a big proponent of batch processing tasks like email and social media.
So instead of like constantly checking our phones and getting those dopamine hits,
Right. You're not constantly getting interrupted and pulled away from what you're trying to focus on.
it's like creating those designated times for distraction instead of letting it just like bleed into every moment of our day.
Exactly. It helps you take back control of your attention.
That's really powerful. Okay, so we're setting boundaries, we're batch processing. Are there any other strategies that he suggests?
Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Remove those tempting distractions from your environment altogether.
Okay, so like actually putting your phone in another room,
Exactly. Or turning off notifications or using website blockers.
right, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
It's amazing how well that works.
It really does. And it's not just about physical distraction. Oyl also talks about curating your digital environment.
So being mindful of like the apps and websites that we allow into our lives.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself, are these things truly serving me or are they just sucking up my time and attention?
And it's easy to get sucked into those time-wasting apps and websites, especially when you're feeling down or stressed or just looking for a way to escape.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of what you're allowing into your digital space.
So it's like we're creating a digital detox, but in a way that feels empowering, not restrictive.
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices that align with your values and goals.
This is all starting to feel a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
We're not just fighting against distractions, we're proactively designing a life that's less susceptible to them.
That's the power of Indistractable. It's about taking control and creating a life that feels more aligned with who you want to be.
This is making me think about how much control we actually have over our lives, even when it feels like everything is spiraling.
I think that's such an important realization
Yeah.
that we actually have a lot more agency than we often give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, and that even in the midst of chaos and those, really tough times, that we can still make choices that move us forward.
Absolutely. And that's what Eyal's book is all about. It's about providing us with the tools and the insights to take back control of our attention, our time, and ultimately our lives.
And that's a really empowering message, especially for those who are feeling lost or discouraged.
It is.
It's a reminder that we're not powerless, that we can choose to change, to become more intentional, more focused, more in control.
We have the power to create the lives we want.
It's like we're taking back the reins, becoming the authors of our own stories, instead of letting distractions dictate the narrative.
I love that metaphor.
And so, as we move into part 3 of this deep dive, I'm really curious to explore those deeper reasons why we get distracted.
Right. We've talked a lot about strategies.
Yeah.
But now it's time to go a little deeper.
Yeah, to understand those underlying needs and desires that are driving our behavior.
Absolutely. And to explore how self-compassion plays a role in all of this.
Stay tuned. So we're back. We've been exploring some pretty deep stuff in Indistractable.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
It does because, we talked a lot about the practical strategies like time boxing and managing external triggers.
Right, the how-tos.
But now I want to kind of dive into the why.
Yeah, the underlying motivation.
Exactly. Because, it's one thing to learn the techniques, but if we don't understand why we're getting distracted in the first place, those techniques are only going to get us so far.
Absolutely. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Yeah, you've got to address the root cause.
And one of the things that Eyal really emphasizes is that distraction often stems from a desire to escape discomfort.
Okay.
Whether it's boredom, stress, anxiety, loneliness, whatever it is, we're trying to avoid facing those uncomfortable feelings head on.
So it's like distraction is a coping mechanism.
Exactly. It's a way to numb ourselves out to avoid dealing with the stuff that's really bothering us.
And for our listeners out there who are feeling down and out,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is such an important point to recognize, because when you're already struggling, it's so easy to fall into that trap of using distraction to escape.
It's almost like a reflex.
It is, and it can become this vicious cycle. You're feeling bad, so you distract yourself, which makes you feel even worse, so you distract yourself even more.
And the more you distract yourself, the less equipped you become to actually deal with those uncomfortable feelings.
So it's like we're actually making the problem worse.
In a way, yeah.
So how do we break free from that cycle?
Well, one of the keys is to cultivate self-compassion.
Okay, I love this concept.
It's so important because when we beat ourselves up for getting distracted, we're just adding more fuel to that fire of negativity.
Right, it's like we're already feeling bad and then we're making ourselves feel even worse.
Exactly. And that shame and guilt just make it even harder to break free from those patterns.
So instead of judging ourselves, we need to approach ourselves with kindness and understanding.
Exactly. And that means recognizing that we're all human. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of weakness.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be imperfect.
Yes, and to learn from our mistakes rather than punishing ourselves for them.
So it's like, instead of saying, oh, I'm so stupid, I got distracted again.
We can say, you know what? I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now, and it's okay that I got distracted. I'm going to try again tomorrow.
That's so much more supportive and encouraging.
Right. It's about being your own best friend.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with.
We're often much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on a friend.
Yeah, we would never say those things to a friend that we say to ourselves.
And that's why self-compassion is such a powerful tool for change, because it creates a more supportive environment for growth.
So it's like we're creating this inner sanctuary where we can feel safe to experiment, to fail, and to try again.
Exactly. And that's where the real magic happens.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Indistractable,
Yeah.
what are some of the key takeaways that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they'll remember that they're not alone in this struggle with distraction.
Yeah, we all deal with it.
Every single one of us, it's a universal human experience.
And it's not a sign of weakness or failure.
It's just part of being human.
What else?
I hope they'll remember that they have more control than they might realize. That they can choose to change their habits, their environment, their mindset.
And that they can choose to focus on what truly matters.
That's the key to becoming indistractable.
It's about aligning your actions with your values and creating a life that feels more fulfilling and meaningful.
And that's a journey worth taking.
It is, and I want to thank you for taking this journey with us today. It's been an incredible conversation.
It has been a pleasure.
And to our listeners out there, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in to this deep dive into Indistractable. If you haven't already, definitely check out Nir Eyal's book. It's full of even more amazing insights and strategies. And a huge shout out to Teacher Ricky for letting us use his fantastic YouTube channel for this deep dive.
Big thanks to Teacher Ricky.
And be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who you think might benefit from it.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive? What other books or topics would you like us to tackle? And be sure to tell us what country you're listening from.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay focused, and stay indistractable.